So my project is focused on reaching the unreached in Palm Beach County, Florida. I currently live in West Palm Beach, which is within Palm Beach County. And we're going to look at the theological reflection to start off. There's a picture, as you see, on just a picture that helps me and think about the story of Scripture, that God is the main character and He's working, and there's 4 acts of creation. And this picture is also in your handout. If you already downloaded that, you can do so. And I'm going to, you can look at that when I talk about the next slide. And so in theological reflection, there's 2 questions. One is, what is the mission? In reference to what is God's mission and what is our mission? And second is, how do we do that? How do we do the mission? And to start off with, what is the mission of God? The Missio Dei, the mission of God. We see that God is on a mission to glorify Himself. And we see this in the context of those 4 acts, that God created us to glorify Him, to worship Him, to love Him. But because of the fall, we rebelled against Him. Or with the fall, we rebelled against Him, and as a result, we have sinful hearts, and we just can't glorify Him and worship Him. And so God is on mission to restore worship and to glorify Him. And Piper would say, missions exists because worship does not. And as a result of God being on a mission to glorify Himself, we have the gospel. We have the work of rescue, so to speak, that God reaches out to those who are unreached, which is all humanity, to believe in His Son, Jesus Christ. And for those who believe in His Son and turn from their sins to have a right relationship with God, they are rescued, they are reached. And those who are not will end up ultimately in eternal hell. And, and in the end, when Jesus comes back, and brings about that salvation for those who believe in Him, and brings about that judgment specifically for all, but specifically for those who don't believe in Him. That's it. And so God is on mission to glorify Himself, and that results in the gospel. And as Matt Chandler would say, quote, God is making much of God and our salvation, end of quote. And so we see that though God is on mission to glorify Himself ultimately, this leads to the gospel, and that God is restoring the universe and humanity back to Himself, ultimately to the glory of God. And so in thinking about responding to this God who is on mission to reach the unreached, we already mentioned people believing in Jesus, believing in God's Son, and turning from their sins to follow Him. So they're reached, they're rescued. But also there's a second response for those people. And that second response is to also join God on mission. And God commands us in Matthew 28 to do so, to make disciples of all the nations, to reach the unreached. And also if we don't, like in Romans 10 specifically, like if no one shares, how will they hear? How will they believe if no one shares about this gospel? And so, in thinking about, what is the mission, that God is on a mission for ultimately to glorify Himself, and there's the gospel, and He reaches the unreached. And those who He reaches, like you and me, who believe in Him and follow Jesus, are also called and commanded to reach the unreached as well. But how do we do that? And in Scripture, there's at least 3 examples, Jesus being the perfect example, and then Peter and Paul. And so we see, Jesus humbled Himself to become a human, so He identified with the unreached. He also became a learner, as I've, just that word learner I've heard before. He learned what it means to be a human. He learned what it means to be a Jew. He identified with the people. He also loved the people, but His love did not sugarcoat what He had to say. He was a man of truth, and he is truth. But He also lived His life to the glory of God, even in the midst of unreached people. And He didn't sin. And ultimately He sacrificed for those unreached people. And we see this, a sacrifice also with Peter and Paul. Peter sacrificed his cultural preferences when he crossed over to reach Cornelius, a Gentile. Paul wanted to become all things to all people in order to reach the unreached with the gospel. And so in thinking about, what is the mission, that God is on mission to glorify himself, and he reaches the unreached with the good news about Jesus, and he calls those who are reached with that good news to continue to spread that. And we see these principles here on how to do that. Even though this list is not exhaustive, it helps us in thinking how to reach the unreached in Palm Beach County. And so in Palm Beach County, there's a population of about 1.4 million as of July 1st, 2015, ethnically diverse, Caucasian, African American, Haitian, Latino, Hispanic, and so forth. But there's also diverse in economic status. There's people who are in the cycle of homelessness. There's rich, there's poor. But an important observation about Palm Beach County is that back in 2000, there was about 355,000 people who identified themselves with no religion or none. And 10 years later, it doubled to about 836,000 people. So it was 355,000, and now it's 836,000 back in 2010. Huge increase. But those who identified themselves with a religion, at least the religions that were listed, were 775,000 about. And 10 years later, it decreased to 483,000 or so. And so significant change in those who identified themselves with no religion and those who were identifying themselves with a religion decreased. And also we see just the culture as well with Barna Group's research, in that they said West Palm Beach is number 11 in the United States as, quote, top churchless cities, end of quote. And so West Palm Beach has 48% of its population as unchurched, which Barna described as people, quote, have not attended a church service except for a holiday or special occasion at any time within the past 6 months, end of quote. And so almost half of West Palm Beach back in 2015 are just not regular attended church at all in the past 6 months. But an even more important statistic, which is interesting, that shows the need also, is that from West Palm Beach to Fort Pierce, Fort Pierce is in St. Louis County, so a different county, but West Palm Beach to Fort Pierce has 17% of people who have never been churched, which means, Barna says, have never in their lives regularly attended a church. And so we see just this, a lot of people in Palm Beach County, the shift in religion and the lack of people attending a church is evident. And there's the need to reach the unreached with the gospel. And so how did Palm Beach County get to this state? Well, a simple answer is because of sin. Sin in people's lives lead them to a downward spiral away from God. But there's also some possible reasons why there is a shift as well. By just reviewing, earlier the other day, historical things have taken place that can either draw people to God or away from God. For instance, 9/11 on a national level, that was a huge event. Terrorists being identified with a certain religion, and so that can turn people off to religion, but also can make people question, why would a loving, good God allow that? But also, international level, like the tsunami, I believe, back in Southeast Asia earlier in the 2000s, from what I understand, that can bring about questions as well. Why would a good, loving God do that, allow that? But not only with these disasters can people be turned off with God or Christianity, religion, potentially, but also a bad taste of church. And so, for example, Catholic priests who have molested, abused children, Christians who have not responded well to just abortion clinics, and other things as well. that people have done in the name of Christianity, and people can just have a bad taste of church, potentially. But also another possibility of why Palm Beach County is the way it is because of population. There's over 120 SBC churches in Palm Beach County based on Palm Beach Baptist Network. And obviously there's other churches in Palm Beach County. But that would be about 12,000 people per church. And so there's a huge need for just the gospel to spread and churches to be planted. And so what is the such strategic formation on reaching the unreached in Palm Beach County? So first, starting with the leaders. The leaders lead by example. And so if leaders don't, how will they expect others to do so? And so they need to believe the gospel. They need to live in light of the gospel. They need to share it, communicate the gospel. And the primary method will be through relationships, through friendships, and through the examples of Jesus. For example, Peter, Paul, you reach people where they are. You love them. Some practical ways in Palm Beach County, you just build relationships by inviting non-Christians over for dinner, get involved in activities in the community, at your kids' school if you have kids, have a hobby, go to the same restaurants in order to build relationships. And as Tim Chester and Steve Timmis would say, it can simply be, quote, ordinary things with gospel intentionality. So church leaders ought to have that gospel, the gospel of Jesus, be on their heart and mind, and let it be fleshed out in their daily life. And by being around non-Christians, they'll see the difference in how we live our lives to the glory of God like Jesus did. And there may be questions asked, and we can share the gospel. But also, even if they don't, we can bring up and transition conversations into gospel conversations. And a great tool is the 3 circles, which is in your handout. You can go to, and it helps communicate the gospel, inviting a non-Christian to hear your story in the gospel as well, and help them identify where they are. And there's resources on the handout with that, like Family Church has some videos and so forth. But also, in addition to leaders leading by example, they need to preach the word, teach the word. If they're doing it right, the gospel will be made known. The mission of God will be made known. The church's mission of making disciples will be made known. But also to present a vision of what it could look like in their context. And so, for example, there's a local church here, Family Church. They have a goal, quote, to plant 100 new churches in Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade counties, end quote. So presenting a vision of what we're trying to do, what could God do, but also providing opportunities. Provide opportunities to be equipped, the church to be equipped with the gospel, help them believe it, help them to learn what it means to live in light of it, but also help them live or to share it. And the 3 circles could be a helpful tool with that. And also other resources that leaders can provide, but also helping them be equipped to build relationships and providing questions on how to transition conversations and so forth, but also providing opportunities to be on mission and context. And really, I've heard a quote from a local pastor here from a guy named Bob Barnes, who the pastor referred to. He says, quote, family is the new revival tent. And so just like the church leaders, the church must also think about who's around their family, who's in their neighborhood, who's in their class, so that they can reach out to and love and learn and communicate the gospel with. And as a result of the church doing that and following Jesus with the relationships and building relationships, in addition to the ones they already have, groups can be formed like missional communities and among other types of groups that can meet in a neighborhood or on a school in order to gather and reach unreached people, to hear the gospel and to learn more about it. So this is a more relational approach. And lastly, we have leaders raise leaders. So you see that, you lead by example, you point them to Jesus, and you equip them to do so. and you partner with other churches in the area.